one of the things that I like about movement lesson, and not just, again, I created this way because I was a frustrated parent.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to learn. If I wasn't allowed to ask a question, I have a master's degree, I have a PhD, and it's totally respected of that. There was never a question of that, but there's just was there one little thing that you can show me that I can have, again, because my whole big thing was continuity of care. Because my son was so sick, I didn't know if I was going to, and then your daughter too, you don't know if you're getting to the next appointment, you know what I mean, if you're not in the hospital and having a surgery or again, and especially now with COVID, or our kids, if they're even so much as got a sniffle, right, the physio's not entering the house or that kind of thing, or I was center-based therapy at that point. Like, again, I couldn't imagine going through COVID and not had suddenly like this Zoom consultations and nobody actually touching my child. But that's where I like doing the intensives, but also they can have do homework. But again, it's how do, the difference too is the other modalities I feel have taken away that empowerment from a parent. So the parent kind of sits there and waits for the therapies to kick in, and they just don't realize they can be doing something.
Yeah, and I think that's massive, isn't it, that you actually got to carry on at home, because the intensives are great, but then you're not going to come for another intensive for another 6 months. So it's, you know, that you need to be, and that's what the great thing about movement lesson is, access to all those videos that you can just look at home and carry it on. Whereas going into other therapies and to literally be told by somebody when you're asking a question, no, yeah, that question's not relevant, wait till the end. Every question is important. Like if I was a teacher and an inspector came in to me, one of my students asked me a question, I said, that's a rubbish question, wait for it till the end, I'd probably get sacked. You know, like every question is important, and if you're not sharing what you're doing with somebody, how does a parent expect it to carry it on? And I think that's something for me that movement lesson stands apart from so many other therapies that probably on the same sort of level that people put it at. There's not that access, you know.
And then there's not that access, but also there are times I felt very humiliated. You know what I mean? Like that I wasn't even qualified to be a mom, much less, you know, you're told to leave the room. I just actually had a client where I found out that their therapist or modalist told her that she had to lay underneath the table. Right? She'd you know what I mean? Like the child wasn't allowed to look at her, so she didn't want to leave the room. So she had to lay under the table. And so there's that, but you as a sports coach too. Now, you would also not, like if you want someone to play for the team, they have to go home and practice. And you can tell immediately if they didn't practice.
Yeah.
But that's common knowledge, you know, like you go home and you're still kicking the ball, right? No parent would say stop kicking the ball unless it's like dinner time. And so that conversation needs to be picked up more, not only if you're doing movement lesson, but any modality. That continuity, that practice, you can't just go to one like soccer game or just a coaching session and suddenly be a Pele. But I'm now showing my age because people probably don't even know who he is anymore.
Messi.
Yeah. So, but I mean, don't you think too?
Yeah.
Like,
and then that's what, like within sports terms, deliberate practice has been such a key focus for such a long time. And even like the more recent research that's coming out, that there's been a lot of criticism of deliberate practice. And you look at, right, well, deliberate practice is actually getting into the fact you can look at epigenetics. So yeah, okay, genetics is really important, practice is really important, putting them together, and the environment's actually changing your genes, and that's how it doesn't just come from 1 or 2 sessions. It's repeating it regularly. That's how you're reaching other levels. And going back to what you said, if you think about different phases of skill acquisition, and you've got an associative phase before you hit autonomous, and you think, right, well, if you've got to think about it, there's your cognitive phase, there's like step 1, and then if you're only working on somebody they're only having that therapy in a therapist's room, the parent isn't even allowed to be seen in there. That becomes very associative. you're not going to reach that autonomous stage with that movement. It has to go back, and they need to be able to move and be able to do these things at home. So they start to realize where it starts to become more functional with all the movement.
Right, but I also want to stress too, where movement lesson is completely different, that doesn't mean patterning, right? It by the disassociation of what's going on in sports versus going on in therapy, right? He's not going to say, take this ball, throw it, take this ball, throw it. Now, first of all, though there is some kind of repetitive motions, but what you also have to realize is that our kiddos are growing. So first of all, they can have a growth spurt. Just the change in that changes your visual organization, your spatial awareness, your coordination, your eye spine, your eye hand. I can go on and on and on. So by going also always on patterning in a therapeutic approach, right, doesn't necessarily change over into cognitive uses, right, like you would have, because let's say if it's a soccer coach or a goalie of some sort, soccer or rugby, right? It's not just the ball's going to come straight at you and you're going to stop it, right? That's the last place the ball's going to come when you're a professional, right? It starts out this way, but eventually, you know what I mean? You're all over the place and you've got to be able to dive and that's where I frown a little bit, where I see other people work on that repetitive. That's not practice. Right.
And that's where like variation comes from, and like the more variation, the more that we're going to learn, and the more progress that we're going to get. And I think in some instances there as well, just the fact that you're going into a different room, like I know sometimes, and I make a point with Quinn when we're at home doing things in different rooms, because suddenly it's different lighting and there's different equipment to get on, there's different sounds. And I know like some parents, some therapists, we went to one and they said, don't speak, don't celebrate, don't cheer, don't. And then I was just like, well, okay, that's fine for one thing. So you've got to be focused in, but at the same time, actually, there's research out there that's showing differentiated learning, how actually putting sound in there is just another process, and that's variation for you. Actually talking to somebody and giving feedback could be seen as a distraction, but actually it's variation at the same time, and you might be counting numbers at the same time and you're working on the table or something, and suddenly that's just developing something a little bit extra and adding that variation.
Right, and that's why too we include vision, right? You just don't see that in, I know very few modalities that include vision, but again, at all areas, not only do my lungs have to work, but so do my eyes, right? And it all gets coordinated in. But also, I've sometimes had like 6 siblings in the room. I'm telling you, like it was a packed house. But I don't care, again, if he's my client coming in and he's just gotten out of jail. Not to be disrespectful of anyone, but this is what the child goes home to, right? And so also by having that association, because I've seen it too, where let's say dad's real close, but mom's over there, and I'll start pointing out that the child's not seeing past the 3 feet to mom, or not looking for that visual, and that's one of the things that we have to work into. And it might be something as simple as mom's over there just doing something visual to draw that attention, because it's not that the child has to stop what they're doing here and just go look at mom, but that, oh, you're there, okay, back to, you know what I mean, but just having what I call working the room. But again, this is what happens out in a field, and when you're practicing, and when you're around with your buddies, and when you're around, when you go to a park, you do not see kids in Zen mode going up the ladder and feeling the placement of each foot. Those kind of modalities come into play at times, but at the same time, a child really learns like spaghetti sauce, like it all gets thrown into a pot and it all starts coming together. And sometimes you need that detailed work, and sometimes it needs to look like a hot mess, for lack of a better words. But sometimes that's when the kids just have this big breakthrough, because they can now take that detailed movement and use it more appropriately.
Functional, again, it's functional movement, functional vision, and being able to process the information. And maybe some children have sensory overload, and perhaps that's why they struggle, but for a lot of children, that's how you learn, how you learn from watching other children and playing it in nursery and play school, whatever it might be, and that's where the learning comes from, and learning to process that information and copy people.
Right. And just being typical, and just enjoying bringing their surroundings back to where it's more, I hate to say the word normal, but I mean normal as a house setting, not for them for personality wise. If it's almost like if I was in a loud discotheque, right? And imagine all these bells and whistles, and I ask you a mathematical equation or something that's out of your norm, you'll be like, okay, when it gets quiet, let me think about it, and I'll discuss it with you. But at the same time, like you said, when you've got it, it doesn't matter where you are, you can do it, right? And that's that big jump that needs to happen sometimes. But it's easier to jump, in a session with movement lesson than it is sometimes to just jump off the Grand Canyon kind of thing. And allowing the children to be successful, as much as what they're used to is really the goal. Our kids are amazing, but it just takes different ways to get kids out to be able to be successful. But when they're in a stressed environment where they already know from the get-go, or it's not going to be so successful, no difference for you or for him as it is with any of our kids, and that needs to change. Not just with in teaching and therapies and lots of things just need to be successful. You just see parents even complaining about school photos going awry because the child is separated and not having that. It's important. It's important to our families, and it's important to the whole process of development for all of our kids.
And I think that's something for me that we've said from the beginning of movement lesson. Like the very first, I think that the first time we brought Quinn into a session, Leanna done the research. I didn't know a lot about what was going on, but it hit a chord with me in terms of where I was as a teacher, where I was as a sports coach, and it was putting the child in the middle. I think too much of, particularly in the UK with PTs, that they want to look to perhaps maintain, put children in more like equipment. They put things in there. The physio is at the centre of the session, and the child does what the physio wants to do. And so many parents come into sessions and say, oh, they hate being on the stomach. They scream in physios. They refuse to go to the physio sessions because the physio's forcing them to do things they don't want to do. But again, research is there to show that we learn more and we retain more when we're happy and we're enjoying it. So we come into movement lesson, and it's about facilitating the movement, and it's about allowing the child to play and enjoy themselves. And like you said before, you get ahead, you get a butt,
I get a butt.
That's you go in with an idea of what you want to work on, but you're allowing them to play and enjoy it. And there's going to be occasions when a child's going to be unhappy, and as much as I can go
tired,
to the gym,
like her daughter's their daughter is suffering from jet lag right now. It happens, and or they just get hungry, or they think of something too. They're nonverbal. They think of something, they want it, and they're frustrated. There are a lot of things that can happen. But my proudest moment too is if you listen to my hallways, you're not hearing kids screaming right now. They're just not. They want to come here. I'm actually a little kiddo that's sick right now today, couldn't come in, and that's all he wants to do is see Felipe. He wants to be in here, and it's almost like a punishment to him that he's not here. So
we once got told by therapists to say like every child has to cry, and they go through a phase of crying, and it's like fight or flight, and they'll only learn something if they hit a fight. And I was just like, a child has to cry. Like there's two of us that went in, and the other family didn't bring their son back because they didn't like how upset he was made to feel, and you just think like therapies like that I think are just missing a point. Like again, look at the research, the fact that people are learning more and retaining more, that the happier they are. And you're not going to get a perfectly happy smiling child every single time, we get that, but to think that they have to be upset, it's just wrong. And
no, well, I'll immediately start looking, is it a diaper, it is or whatever. There's just no, as the movie says, there's no crying in baseball. So there's no crying at movement lesson, but again, it's not even the cry, it's the stress, it's the wanting to come, it's the wanting to just move better. I mean, it feels good. It's their language, but I always tell the parents too, if you get on my table, you wouldn't leave either, so. But anyway, we'll see you in the next video.